Thanks for tuning in to the HR Uprising podcast. I'm your host, Lucinda. The HR Uprising is focused on helping forward-thinking people professionals deliver real lasting value in their organisations. I'm a chartered psychologist, speaker and trainer, and recently authored the best-selling business book, How to Be a Change Superhero. My day job is founder and CEO of software and training business Actus. This gives me the opportunity to work with other businesses like yours. We are focused on building a better workplace for people wherever they are located, with the help of our performance, learning and talent management software and our training and consultancy services. Every week on the podcast, I will be covering different topics and challenges, joined by relevant experts and real-life people professionals. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really hope you enjoy and get value from this week's episode. Hello and welcome to this week's very special episode of the HR Uprising podcast. And it's a very special episode because who would believe it? This has been going for 5 years or nearly 5 years, and this is my 250th episode. I have to stop and go, wow. So thank you for those of you who've been listening from the first, or those of you who join me later, but thank you for listening, for joining, and thank you to all my guests. Now, what we're also doing is we're kicking off a really special series that I gathered feedback from many of the listeners. Many of the listeners to the HR Uprising podcast are people who are starting out on their HR career, and they're picking up knowledge and also inspiration. And I wanted to ask this guest to see if they would come and join me. And a little bit of a clue, if you don't already know the surprise, this is somebody who's been with me before a number of years ago, but someone who's got a really, truly inspirational journey, in my opinion, more than the journey, but more about who this person is for the HR community. So this person was on my 25th, my first sort of landmark episode, way back in about 2020. He was very kind to join me, and I was so chuffed at the time, English term, but you might get some clues if I use the word that I'm geeked that he's joined me this time. I'm so delighted that Steve Browne, fabulous Steve Browne, has agreed to be my landmark guest on the 250th episode, and this is kicking off our career series, which is about career journeys of chief people officers. Over to you, Steve, just to say hi, let you get a word in edgeways, but thank you so much. You might have gathered I'm really excited that you're here for my landmark episode.
Hi, Lucinda. It's so amazing. 250 episodes is astonishing. It's really good. Most people don't make it this far, so good for you. I think it's wonderful that you're continuing this good work.
Thank you. And we're so pleased that there's many people who still listen, interact, and if you're one of them, tell other people, because there's a great back catalogue of content that you might find useful. Interestingly, I'm not sure that the people who do our podcast, who I originally signed up for a lifetime deal, I'm not sure they're so happy I've made it to 250 episodes. But hey, unlucky, you win some, you lose some. So Steve, going into the topic of this, you are the Chief People Officer at LaRosa's pizzeria across America. Probably, I know you're very well known to US listeners, of which about 30% of our listeners are. You'll be maybe less well known. Is it LaRosa? Is that you pronounce it? Do you want to tell me a little bit about your existing role? And I know you've been there a while, and then perhaps let's go back through your career journey.
Sure. I'm at LaRosa's Incorporated. We are a pizzeria. We're not all across America. We're just in the Ohio area. We're a regional pizzeria. This last year, we celebrated our 70th anniversary. Wow. Which is rare for restaurants, especially when you see the news nowadays, especially over here. Unfortunately, restaurants are a tough business. You don't have a lot of profit margin. It's a constant turnover. It's just part of the nature of hospitality. But we've been doing well for 70 years, and we have a bright future ahead. I became the Chief People Officer in 2020. So my role, I'm not sure how you want to do this. I can go into my role a lot, or we can talk about how I was fortunate to be in this position.
Well, let's just go a little bit more into your role at the moment. I'm interested to know how many people you're responsible for, and what sort of day-to-day challenges, what sort of things you're doing day-to-day. And I think quite one of the questions for me is, because I know you've been there a long time, you might have been CPO for 5 years, but you've actually been in that business a long time, how you've developed the role. So let's stick with that, and then perhaps go back to your earlier days.
My role is very interesting now. I would say it's 125% strategic and very little tactical. Very, very little. I have a wonderful team of 3 people. We have 1,000 team members right around there in our locations. So at our company, we have 10 pizzerias, a corporate office, a call center, and a bakery manufacturing facility. So that makes up our 1,000 team members. But my role is more, how do we help move the organization forward as a whole? I think it's where HR should be going, honestly. We're trying to become the people first company we were founded as, but I think there's a lot different between aspiration and reality. So we're doing our best to make it come to life. So all of our efforts are, how are we using the great talent that we have in order to move the company forward? So I've been spending time working on what roles and responsibilities should we have, not what do we have.
Yeah.
Where should we grow? Because we're going to come up on a cliff of people you've mentioned a few times. I've been here a while. I've been here 18 years, going on my 19th year now, and I'm still one of the least senior people. It's
Wow.
really an amazing place. But uh, seniority also brings age, and age brings people who want to go to that next stage of their career or retire. So we're going to face quite a big change in the next 3 to 5 years with people who are retirement eligible or considering that, or they're going to do it. So we have to make sure that that happens. We don't lose knowledge in the meantime, and we either bring people up through the ranks, which we do very well, or we hire externally. It's interesting, Lucinda. I am one of the few external hires in
Wow.
our company.
This is a huge amount about the retention of the
Yeah,
organization. Yeah.
it's wonderful. It's also challenging though. When you talk about challenges, when you have people who've been so good, so diligent, so loyal, and so talented, it's hard to replace a 45-year employee.
Yeah.
It's something to celebrate, but it's hard to replace. You can't replicate. So with it, we're going to have quite a significant amount of ongoing change. So it's, how do we lead the change? I don't believe in managing change. I mean, in my role as CPO, I'm leading the
Yeah.
change along with the executive team. It's not a single person effort, but in my role, I'm the facilitator of our executive meetings. I pull things together across the organization. I don't sit in my silo of HR. It's really a people officer role. So your work, wherever there are people, that's where I get to work.
Which is pretty much everywhere, especially in a retail business in terms of what you're doing. So just two things on that. When you sort of said about your role is now 125% strategic, have you made that happen, or how did you manage to get to that point? Because often I think that's one of the things that's the transition for many people if you're shifting into the CPO role. And also you mentioned you've got a team. It helps a lot if you've got people to do stuff, doesn't it, in that situation? How did you get there? Was there any resistance? And yeah, and how could others do the same thing?
Well, it was interesting. I was actually asked when I became the CPO, our controller, or sorry, she was vice president of finance, became the CFO. So we added 2 C-level people. So we're small as an organization. Our overhead is pretty low compared to other places because our people make money in the pizzerias. So we can't have this giant overhead.
Yeah.
So I think there's a difference between people who have a title and people who make it happen. So I think it's not a matter of what I'm called, it's a matter of what I offer. And I would say that I've had a strategic bent since I've been in HR, but I have an organization now that wants to take the direction and ideas and creativity, innovation, and try things. So it was the culture that provided latitude. We had unfortunately, my boss passed away in 2020, right after I was promoted, and he made the promotion happen. He's like, "Look, I'm going to be close to retiring. I think you should jump in." We had a person who had the title in the past, but we didn't really know what it was. We just had one because you're supposed to have one, and that wasn't their background. They're a great operations executive, but it really wasn't a people side. So when you say make it happen, I would say it's been more. I've really put myself in a position to be available, accessible, and willing. And I think that's necessary at the executive level, at any HR level, really. That's really should define HR. But um, quick example, the operations leadership team, three great people got together and they were having their meeting, and it's very tactical right off the bat. We just jump into the weeds because it's what operations does, and they're wonderful at it. So the person who's going to succeed and probably become our CEO at some time, as a family company, he's a family member. He said, "Hey, can you come in here? Because I need some balance." And I know you don't know all the stuff we're doing, and you don't have to, but I like how you think. So I think the big change between what we're doing and what I'm seeing in other companies is a CPO or a CHRO should say, what perspective do you bring? Are you making sure other people's perspectives are being heard? Are you bringing in collaboration? Are you building relationships? Are you looking at diversity of thought, diversity of approach? Because if you're not, it's just this giant echo chamber. And we have been for quite some time because operations people were running everything. And so I think it's a mix. It's not we treat organizations too much like a versus. It's HR versus. Instead of saying, because there are people and they operate, they work together. And that's the truth. And that's been the truth in every organization. It's just a lot of people don't operate that way.
It is interesting because undoubtedly you said that you already think strategically, but and also this sort of the people thing, linking your hands there, that is kind of your superpower as well, isn't it? And we'll later on we'll talk about we're talking about your Pete thing, but actually I know you because of your reach across the world, actually, in terms of the HR community. Hashtag HR community listeners. That's what Steve kicked off. And do join that, by the way. Go onto LinkedIn and do that. And you're all about collaboration and people and sharing ideas. And you're very generous with that kind of way of thinking outside of your organization, aren't you? And I suppose we'll come back to that specifically, but I mean, for me, that feels like that weaves into what you're talking about. It's where you work within your organization. You don't just restrict it there, do you? You're wider than that.
Right, right. So it was interesting. One of the sad things whenever someone leaves or passes away, I get to be the person who cleans out their office. And I take great care because you should never be excited about someone leaving. Never. You should handle it with care. A good friend of mine said, red carpet in, red carpet out. So as I was cleaning out my boss's office, I came across a spreadsheet I did. And it's not really a spreadsheet. It doesn't have cells. It's a big drawing. And he asked me years ago, hey, how would you draw the organization? He was a very different thinker. I really, I appreciated that he was willing to let me just stretch. So I said, hey, I don't think we work in a hierarchy. I think we work more in, and I put bubbles. And I know it, the technical term, people will say it's a matrix organization and this is the structure. Stop it. Bottom shelf, bubbles. People work together. They work across things. And instead of having a hierarchy, can we have this? So I sat down with our CEO after Kevin passed. And I said, hey, I want to talk to you about what the company really looks like. He said, sure. So I pulled out an org chart and I said, look. And he's, so here's all the lines and the dotted lines and who reports to who. And he goes, yeah, yeah. I said, this is what I found in Kevin's office. And I did this in 2013. And he looked at it and goes, what's this? I said, this is how we really work. And he says, really? So he looked at it and he goes, oh yeah, I get it. I get it. We need to be this. People need to have anchors and be tied to people. But when we started taking on the ideas that I was willing to come up with openly, it's opened up a whole arena of different thought and different opportunities.
What's interesting about that is I think that also links into you being strategic because you're seeing the bigger picture of the organization, but also you mentioned earlier you lead change. And in order to lead change, you've got to know where the power is. And the power isn't necessarily in the hierarchy, is it? It's often in the people who are talking to people who are natural leaders of those sort of things. So the way in which you're kind of seeing those links, I can and not everybody sees that. So there's something there. I suppose then this is a good opportunity for us to go back to what brought you into HR in the beginning of your career, because there's obviously something quite vocational about your career and your people orientation, which again, as we've said, you do people for fun. It's not just for a job, is it? So do you want to go back and tell us a bit how you got into HR in the first place?
Well, it's funny. I've talked to many people, podcasts, all this kind of stuff, and people say they fall into HR like it's a mistake, like, oh no, oh, they fall in. And then they kind of figure it out. I chose. Where I fell into it was I started out in as a chemical major at university, and I was failing miserably because I was focusing on people far more than I was, you know, pipettes and lab stuff. A friend of mine was in a lab with me, and he was working with a chemical that was a carcinogen or a potential carcinogen, and he was sick. And I said, "Hey, I don't think he should be here. Can I take him home and I'll redo the lab with him?" And the teacher swore at me and told me it was none of my
Really?
business. And I go, "Oh, well, it is." So I took my friend, I took him home. I said, "You can fail me." And he did. Uh, and he allowed my friend to come back student. He's a brilliant guy. I hope he stayed as a chemist because he was just wonderful, very talented. But I was miserable. And I went home. I was about to fail out of university. And my mom said, "Why aren't you doing something with people? Because I don't think you see it." He says, "But everything you do is people, whether it's school or church or in the community, you're
Taking your friend
always
home
with
who's
people."
unwell.
Yeah, you do people stuff, so find a profession that does that. So I went into the beautiful field of interpersonal communications, which is a liberal arts degree that says, learn how to talk and work with humans. But I was in an interviewing class, and in the interviewing class, you had to interview everybody and be interviewed by everybody. It was kind of this, it's a lot of fun. I really liked the class. After the end of the class said, "Well, we're going to vote on who should interview and who should be the interviewee." And the people said I should interview myself. And I go, "Oh, well, that's a sign."
That is a sign, a vote of
I,
confidence for sure.
so I went into recruiting because back in the mid 80s, that's how you got into the field. You
Yeah,
couldn't just walk straight into being an HR generalist. It didn't exist as an entry level role.
yeah.
Recruiters did, and it still is a great way to enter the field. So we called it recruiting, not talent acquisition, because that term didn't
But it's kind
exist.
of the sales thing, isn't it? Recruiting as well. And I think sales is often a good route into anything. There's a level of sort of sales bit, ability to communicate in that sort of area. Good route into things.
Hmm. And then after that, I was at a Fortune 100 company, beautiful company, incredible company. Not for me. Uh, you know me. I need space to think and do things and wear fun shirts and have lava lamps, and I just
Exactly. In fact,
need
I'm
that.
looking for your lava lamp in the background. Are you in your home office?
Oh,
Are you? Oh, yeah. Thank you. You're sitting in front of it. We'll have to have a photo
oh,
sent over, please, for listeners. I'll put on the show notes.
oh, sure. Oh no, I think I'm 8 or 9 in here.
Love it.
Because it gives me, keeps me sane. But I needed to be in a role where I could expand and grow. So I worked for an entrepreneur. And so I went from a Fortune 100 to a startup. And the startup world, wow. I mean, you learn HR by just being beaten every day and learning. And they had never had one before. So it was learning by experience. Best thing that ever happened to me, though, because I learned from leaving the Fortune 100 company the importance of culture. And I learned from the entrepreneurial company, you can do HR with people. In the Fortune 100, and still, unfortunately, in large companies, you can do HR without people. And it's
Yes,
sad.
it's quite process, isn't it? But it is useful to know the levels to have seen it in action, I suppose, because
Yeah.
often so being able to take those things from one place to another is quite a useful insight you realise afterwards.
Yeah. Much out. Right at the moment, you're just trying to survive.
Yes.
But since then, I've worked in roles. I was in an HR department of one until I came to LaRosa's 18 years ago. So this will be my 39th year in HR.
Wow,
So,
celebration next year then.
oh yeah. So of all of my career, half of it has been with a team. The other half was on my own. So I learned a lot by being on my own because you have to know the business. You can't just sit and do little ticky-tacky stuff because you have to know the people in the business. So all of the things I keep hearing of learn the business, I think it's just missing. We're business people who practice HR,
Yeah.
you
Yes, I
know?
like that.
Uh,
Absolutely. I also like
so
the added HR department of one, which many people they say it gives it a real sort of authority, if you like, and a respect because there are so many people in that position. But being able to be a business person who's doing HR and have that confidence and credibility, because in a smaller business, you're absolutely it is down to you as to how much you take on that mantle of be respected, I suppose. respect yourself, be respected, be taken seriously, because it's quite easy to end up in being administrative, I think, in that kind of role, because things can be sort of placed on you. I mean, that's an interesting one actually to ask you, Steve, because it's, we're a very female dominated industry. Do you think that that is different because you were HR department of one as a male versus a female experience, contentious one? Feel free to disagree with it, but what's your take on in that?
I don't know. The one thing that I learned from basically my parents, but primarily my mom, was the value of people and the value of relationships. So I'm not your typical male,
Yeah,
you know. Uh, I don't come across as all of the stereotypes of dominant, authoritarian. I hang with you. I like to sit down and talk and get inside. So overall, sure. It's interesting. I think we're becoming more aware of the blind spots that we've had for decades. And the blind spots are something we should learn from. Instead of shaming people
yeah,
or saying, oh, men are like this and women are like this, you just say, hey, during this time, this is how work was. Now it doesn't have to be that. So if it's not, how can we move it forward? I really don't like when people use this is what's wrong in order to prove what's right.
yeah.
Do what you think is best and move things forward. But have I noticed a difference? Yes. There was a conference years ago, the Ohio State HR conference, and the closing keynote speaker said, I'd like all the men to stand up in the room. And there were 11 of us. And the conference had 300 and some people. Fine. But when I joined the profession, it was just coming off where it was almost 80, 90% male. So I've seen both.
Oh,
I've
is that
seen the
right? I
two
didn't realize
extremes.
it swung, actually.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. But back then it was personnel,
Yeah,
labor relations, guy terms,
yeah,
you
trade
know.
union. Okay, yeah, so it's different, sort of more sort of attacking, maybe. I don't know what, but I
Yes.
mean, we're being stereotypical. Forgive me, but it's just interesting because we've all been through environments where work was felt different. And I
Sure.
suppose, well, in a moment, I'm going to get you to sort of reflect on sort of challenges and successes to perhaps that people can do takeaways from there. But I want to weave in also your sort of emphasis on reflection and learning, because you've got you're published in a number of areas, and actually, again, Steve, you absolutely, you're great with your weekly newsletter, don't you? So, I'll maybe put the link to that. It comes out religiously. It's always entertaining, always brilliantly written, and everyone, I recommend you follow Steve on LinkedIn, because he always writes honest, real. You're not doing stuff for attention, are you? Basically, you just sort of from the heart stuff. But you've written two great books as well, HR on Purpose and HR Rising, which I like the way in which that fits with the HR Uprising brand. Is very good in there. How did that weave into this? The sort of the purpose, and it's kind of I feel like they're from the heart. So do you want to talk a little bit about those before we perhaps go into the challenges and things?
Sure. Now, this is going to sound silly. I've written 3 books.
Ah, which one have I
Uh,
missed?
the last one is called HR Unleashed.
Oh, I did know that. Sorry about that. Right, but there we
That's
go.
okay.
Hat
But
trick.
oh yeah, I wanted to be. It's terrible. I wanted to be like the J.R.R. Tolkien of HR. I wanted to have a trilogy. I don't
Yes.
know why. I just did.
Oh, yeah, because
Uh,
then the three, I hope they all look in complementary on the book spines. I can
yes.
visualize them.
So I've been speaking at conferences or local events, HR events, business events for years. And a person came up to me and said, hey, I think you think differently. Why don't you write that down and share that? And I went, oh, thank you. It's very humbling. I appreciate that. And so I decided to sit down. There's a local haunt that's just down the road here that I go to called JTAPS, and Donna is the server, still the server there. And I said, if I can write one chapter that I've never written before, something I've never written, and I've had my newsletter for 25
Yeah,
years.
exactly.
So I was like, if I can come up with something completely different, I'll go forward. And I did. And I went, oh, okay. So my philosophy was I like to read stories. I like to hear stories. I don't like to hear models and philosophies and approaches. Here's an experience. This is what I did with it. Here's an experience. It's a very simple formula. But I wanted to say, so if Lucinda read chapter 4 and chapter 4 resonated with her, that's a win. If chapter 5 didn't, okay, that's fine. But the other reason was I'm tired of people, still tired of people tearing down our profession. I just don't get it. We work with people. I mean, my gosh, it's the best thing ever. So why, this is awful and HR people are this and all these just dark things. So I wanted to write something that supported the profession, that said, yeah, I support it because I do it. I don't support it because I'm an observer of it. I'm a practitioner. So once I started writing, it just started flowing. And Matt, my publisher from SHRM, said, "Hey, sounds good. Ready for another one?" I said, "Sure, let's try it." And then it came out during the pandemic, which was tough. But then I wrote him back after a period of time. I said, "I think I have one more." And what's funny, well, the big transition, and when you talk about how to impact an organization, this was a telltale sign. I was sitting in a meeting with the family here, who are all executives, and we're having a meeting, and one of them says, "Is that going to be in your next book?" And I go, "Really? Sure. Is that okay to be in the next book?" "Yes, absolutely. Put that in your book." So I have a company that rallies around that because they see not that the work focuses on me, but that the work that they've allowed us to do here, allowed me to do, has elevated our company and the profession. And they want to be able to say, we have people that change the profession that they're in. It's astonishing. They've been so supportive.
That's kind of giving me goosebumps, because that's like the HR on purpose thing. So the fact that the business and family run, I suppose, again, you said this is, you've been around, and it's family and its values, that all fits together really nicely, doesn't it?
It
In terms
does.
of that. So tell me, where's the HR? What's the, give us the essence of the HR, and or maybe actually of the trilogy. Does Luke find out his that don't want to give any spoilers, he's his father?
Uh,
Give us a
so
pattern of the trilogy for people who aren't familiar with them.
So HR on purpose was own what you do. Don't apologize. Quit apologizing. Be excited about being in HR because you get to change. HR is the only profession, only one that gets to impact positively or negatively every person in the organization.
Yeah.
No one else does.
Yeah.
So why not own that? The second one was lead from where you are. Don't just exist because so many people are in that HR department of one. They're like, I can't do anything. I'm like, you absolutely can. I've done it.
That's your personal
Here's an
leadership thing,
example.
isn't it? The leading change being, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Stepping
so
up and
you don't have to be a CPO. You can be whatever you're called and lead. And the third one is move the organization forward. Don't just lead. You should be at the table, whatever you want to call it, pushing the organization forward because the purpose of anybody working at any company is to make the company succeed. And we've never looked at that as a profession. We should look at that. We should own that.
yeah,
Because if our people succeed, we succeed. It's an old adage. It just hasn't been practiced.
absolutely. And the organisation, that's the whole thing about engagement, really. It's just in simple terms. It's common sense terms, isn't it, basically?
Yeah.
So along the way, along your 39-year career, if you were to look at some highlights and really big learns, and you're a storyteller, so if you want to turn them into stories, then that'd be most welcome. What would you pick out and share?
Let me go back a while. When I was in the entrepreneurial company, we built gas station canopies and things that went around gas pumps. In fact, we built them for British Petroleum, and I got to come over to Milton Keynes in 1990, 91, because we were going to
I worked
build,
in Milton
we
Keynes
built
quite
a,
well myself.
yeah, we built a BP there, and I got to be, the 20-some-year-old adventurer to go over. But not knowing what I was doing, I was supposed to interview all of our people that worked in the manufacturing facility. And it was very simple. It was prior to computers. So people had to be carpenters, welders, painters, things like that. And every welder I hired failed. Everyone. Now, I interviewed well, but I didn't know what welding was. So the president of the organization said, "Tell you what we're going to do. You're going to work as a welder for a month." And I went, but I went to college. He goes, "Uh-huh. You need to appreciate the work that others do, first of all. And secondly, if they get to know you, they're going to help you." He was brilliant. And so I went out and they messed with me. And fortunately, nothing I welded went out. It was just practice because it would not have been safe. But here were these wonderful men who taught me their craft and their trade, and it helped me understand how beautiful they were, how talented they were. It wasn't that they were below me, they drove the company. But I learned because I worked alongside with them. Once I did that, every welder I interviewed got hired and stayed. Everyone since then.
Plus, your relationship
So,
with that group of people would be so much more credible, right? Than
oh, Yeah, and what's funny, HR people tend to be stuffy, just be honest. Put on a show, put on a face. When you're on the floor and every other word is very colorful, you can say, "Hey, I'm the HR person. We don't talk that way," or you jump in. I jumped in
Yeah,
and I had a ball. And I remember the first day I walked out with my brand new boots to make sure I was safety compliant, and all of the men on the floor came and scuffed my boots. And I said, "What are we doing?" He says, "If you're going to work here, you need to look like you work here."
yeah,
Those little things of making HR acceptable because you value the people for who they are and what they do. I still get, I go out to our pizzerias, I talk to the cooks. I
yeah,
go to our manufacturing place and I talk to the people who make our dough. I never lost that. Too many HR people try to lead from their desk and it doesn't work.
yeah.
Never has. So that
And
was
actually, I suppose
one.
the COVID and being remote makes you have to make a bit more effort for that in some cases. It's not in some places, in some roles, it's harder than it might have been. I suppose you could jump on a call, you can make the effort to jump on virtually as well.
And I think to that point, there's still a lot of what the world of work has changed. My gosh, in all the years I've been in work, we used to fight remote and hybrid work because it was a cost, concern. Now you and I are talking, and I'm in Ohio and you're in England.
I know,
Now
it's
it's
brilliant.
normal.
Yeah,
So I think the big thing is based on the environment you're in, you can choose to be engaging and interested and authentic, or you can be work oriented. I want to know about you, how you're doing, and that kind of stuff, and then we'll get to work. One of the things I wrote about is I think every issue is a people issue, not every situation, because, and I can prove it. When somebody talks, within 4 to 5 words, they're going to say someone's names. So they'll say, we're doing this new spreadsheet and Lucinda. And you go, wait a minute, is it a spreadsheet thing or is it a Lucinda thing?
probably a Lucinda thing if it's a spreadsheet.
But if we would recognize that people make work happen, not work, work doesn't do anything. People make work happen, then it changes how you approach what you do.
So really, saying, roll your sleeves up and don't be shy, and don't be intimidated. Go in and meet people as meet people on their level. It's interesting. A month is a huge investment as well. I'm thinking that's such a brave move by the line manager at the time to get you to properly go and send to do that. And just slightly facetiously, have you ever used what you learned as a welder since? Has it come into handy with you in your day-to-day life?
I have. I did a turn as a welder, as a painter, as a carpenter. I worked on third shift. I worked on second shift. So yeah, I was able to finally use the tools that I had had for years.
Love it. I love it. So that's I suppose that was a kind of turning a challenge into a win. It's a learn in terms of that, and in terms of transferable learn, wasn't it? Would you say this? Yeah. Would you go for something which should come up as a? I don't know how to label that because it feels like it's both a success and a challenge. It was a challenge that was turned into a success because the people weren't working out, and then you've learnt it that way. Any other learns that you'd share with people?
Learn more that we are going to disappoint each other. We say that we're good with failure, but we really aren't. We hold people to an unreasonable standard. It's funny, all of the research shows that people learn from failure.
Yeah.
And not that we should build failure in, but when a mistake happens, you should learn from it. And so, two of the things that we put in when I took the CPO role, again, very bottom shelf. I'm a very simple person because I think people remember simplicity.
Yeah.
We keep building these giant, complex, multi-layered systems. And so the two are this. One is a quality tool that we used from our quality days called PDCA, Plan, Do, Check, Act. So plan, do, check, and then when the check happens, you're going to say, did it fail? Did it perform? How well did it perform? And how do we act? This is not new, but we weren't doing it. And now we do it all the time. And the other one was breathe and check in this world that is just constantly running, constantly just fiercely running. We don't take time to pause and reflect, and we just blow through things. And we end up spending more time on rework, not failure, just rework and churning. If you just go, hey, everybody calm down. We have time. Once you have time, then the check is when you make that next step, who does it affect? So it's trying to get people to be others focused on purpose instead of self-focused only. It's easy to be self-focused. It's how we were born, but others focus needs work. So I think you need to understand the implications of what you do affects others. So since it affects others, who does it affect? And it's worked.
Yeah, the interesting thing about that is making me reflect on, again, often people in HR departments have one. If you're very busy doing, you don't almost have chance, even though you're doing for others or doing, you feel that, but actually you're in a bit of a tunnel vision. And to think about impact on others and to think about strategic and that sort of thing, you need to create that time. So that's and also have the confidence to give yourself that time, have the confidence to think that you are enough, you can do that sort of thing. So it's quite complex in terms of you know, being feeling safe to make. Sometimes people go and they feel like they've got the big load of imposter going on. They don't feel confident, therefore, to be authentic or to make mistakes because they feel like they're supposed to know all the answers instantly and get it right straight away. So I do feel there's something here about absolutely allowing yourself and others to say that mistakes are all part of learning, and not trying to be perfect but creating that time to stop and think, trying to have that discipline to do that. All of those are really quite powerful life lessons, aren't they? And I suppose you've had the confidence to do that, you've made that happen, and you are comfortable in your own skin, and you referenced your parents as well. I wonder whether some of that came through, that your upbringing or anything. Have you ever had an opportunity where you didn't feel, where you felt you were a bit of imposter? And if you have, what are your tips to people for overcoming that?
I don't know that I have personally. However, I know many people who have had that happen as a reality. And the best example I can give is when I get a chance to go speak at conferences and tell them my version of HR. I'm humbled to the point of tears when people come up afterwards and say, I want to do this. I hear where you're coming from. I don't know how to. What can I do? And they just need to know that someone's there to support them. Oh man, I can tell you countless stories of breaking down, tears, hugging, and all this kind of stuff just to say, I got you. I understand. I don't, it's not like, well, I'm not an imposter. I've never been comfortable being someone other than I am. The place I was an imposter was the Fortune 100 company because I wanted to be myself. And they're like, you can be this.
Yeah.
And I went, he's like, I don't know if I can do that. And so my choice was to leave because it was never going to happen. I also know that what I do and how I do shouldn't be copied. We have a term here at LaRosa called LaRosify. So we'll take great ideas and we LaRosify them. So we make them fit us.
Yeah.
So two quick resources to kind of talk about what you've been talking about. One is the Infinite Game by Simon Sinek.
Yeah.
It's brilliant. It's the one book that captures how I think work really is, and it's honestly better than his Start with Why book. The Infinite Game is I'm here. I mean,
Wow.
I reference it constantly because we keep trying to make things very concrete and set instead of work on a continuum. Everything's a continuum. Life, work, relationships, everything's a continuum. And the second one is called Orbiting the Giant Hairball by Gordon McKenzie. It's a great book about how when you're a doer, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but when you are someone who's a producer, a doer, you get stuck in the hairball. And what we tend to do as organizations is straighten it out. Let's fix that hairball out. You can't. And he's brilliant. His idea is come out, learn something, and go back into the hairball and make it better. So I'll give you a good example. You doing this podcast pulls people out of their day to day. They can learn, they can hear different perspectives. It doesn't mean they're going to do it all, but it gives them a chance to clear their head and find something new. Then the reality is go back with joy into what you're doing instead of, oh, I have to go back to my job. It's, oh, I learned this cool thing on Lucinda's podcast. I can make this happen. I learned about this book. I can make this happen. I heard this podcast. I read this newsletter in order to move things forward. But if you don't get out of the hairball every once in a while, the hairball will swallow you.
Yes, and it is interesting, whatever you're listening to, how often something will come up and you go, oh, that's so applicable or that's so useful. But you've got to be, if you're continuing to take information in, have it keeping you fresh, really fresh and inspired. Now, before I come back to the final question of words to your younger self, if you were to give advice to Steve Junior, let's just talk a bit more because we were talking about the imposter thing, and you really let's talk about the HR community, how important it is to you, the fact you speak, how passionate you are about networking, because I think that is one of the routes that not everybody is great at. And I saw, I think it took off certainly. Well, it's probably going for a long time, but there's been sort of peaks and troughs. I think some of it when Twitter/X has come and gone, so that has had an impact on some of the ways in which the flow of conversation is. But the whole idea of collaborating and being stronger together and working with others, I really see you continuing to be an advocate. You hold people up all the time, and not just in your own organisation. So I think that's quite inspiring. So do you want to say a little bit about HR community and what you get from that, and how you'd encourage people to get involved, really?
It goes back to when I was at Ohio University going to college. I used to say hi to every single person going to class. I'd walk up to the class and people are like, oh, I don't want to walk to class with Steve because he's going to say hi to everybody. And I did. And whether I knew you or didn't know you, I felt you deserve that. And now I knew the vast majority of people, and these were people who were outside my arena, but that's just how I'm wired. So wherever I've gone, I thought the more people I can have connected to each other, if I can connect Lucinda to Paul, I may never be in that group, but those two might be just the two people that need to know each other. So it kind of came naturally to me. But way back when I was the chapter president of our local HR chapter here in Cincinnati, I had this crazy idea that no one was getting resources. This was before the internet. This was email, and that was it. And so I started this silly newsletter that said, hey, I want to have fun. I'll take all your questions. And back then, Lucinda, everybody would send their questions to me. So I did
Wow.
this on top of my job.
I mean, that is one of the things, actually, the
Um,
amount of stuff you do that's extracurricular,
Oh yeah, but I have more time than I know what to do with. I mean,
because you're
I'm not.
strategic.
Well, yeah, I don't. I think time is how you use your time versus what time it takes away from. So started writing the newsletter. It was kind of dry, and then I thought, you know what? I'm going to put poems in there because it allows me to be creative. And then I started doing song parodies, and then here comes the internet, and the internet's like, oh, we can meet people, and then I get to meet people from around the world that do what I do. So instead of focusing on how we're different, we are we have a commonality. We're in HR. We work with people. We're in L&D. We're in OD. Pick
Yeah.
something. So because we have a common thread, why not stay together? It kills me that social media has taken this dark turn because it has taken people and they've chosen for good reasons to step away from the platforms. My concern isn't that you stepped away from the platform. My concern is that you chose to be disconnected again.
Yeah.
That's where I really get beside myself. And then there's this horrible, horrible stereotype that people think networking is primarily to find and secure jobs only. That's the last thing. Getting to know you as a person, far more important. We're never, ever going to have jobs together, you and I. But knowing each other allowed us to talk 5 years apart and between then. But here we are 5 years hence having a conversation that we started through social media.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, and it ebbs and flows. And back in the day, it was a really positive zone. The Twitter one, wasn't it? That flow.
It
But it
was.
doesn't mean that you haven't made those connections that you can build on, and it's still there. And I say the HR net, it comes through regular as clockwork. I mean, I can't believe that you write stuff to that extent. You create stuff weekly to that. It's pretty impressive.
I it's got to come out of my head. I don't know how to say
Is
it.
it
I'll
therapy? Is that
hear
what you're saying?
yes, I hear a song and go, oh, we can do that. And I learned through experience, HR people want resources, they want connections, they just don't make the time to do it. And so instead of being someone who tears it down, why not be someone who builds it up? So I'd rather put resources in your lap and let you use them. And they go, well, that's a waste of time. No, it's my choice to do it. It's my
Yeah.
time.
It's putting
Uh,
it out there, and that's a real sort of almost a karma thing, isn't it? What goes around comes around. It feels really very
yeah,
much like that. So
yeah.
just wrapping up, and I realized I've gone massively over time. I knew I would, but just wrapping up our time together. If you were to give yourself, I mean, it doesn't sound like there's a whole load that you would change, honestly. But if you were to give some words of wisdom to Steve Junior, you're starting out, you're just leaving that college course that would be transferable to other people early stages of career, what would it be to sum things up?
I think it goes back to similar to the welder story. I think we need to value people for what they do and who they are, not who we think they should be. When I first came out, I had the misconception that I had to be in this professional, white collar, polished world instead of a world with great people all around me. The receptionist who does an amazing job, the janitor who does an amazing job, the carpenter who does an amazing job, the CEO who does an amazing job. Because what's missing in HR is we get so enamored with titles and levels that we forget that the CEO is a person who has a family, who has the same concerns as everybody else, who the frontline person has. If we would treat people just as humans, and I know it sounds very trite, but we don't. If we treat people as humans, work is easy. If we keep focusing on work and work and work, people are hard. So focus on the people first. I wish I would have learned that. It took too long and too many bumps. But once I finally figured that out, off it went.
Yes, it was. And the interesting thing you're saying there about focusing on the people first, that stops you focusing on you, which makes you being less self-conscious. If you're just genuinely focusing on them, it's almost less intimidating because you're not in your own head worrying about what you are or are not doing, because you're focusing on them.
Yes.
Fabulous. Steve Browne, thank you so much for being my 25th and my 250th not guest, but my guest on my 250th episode. I'm truly grateful to you for joining today. And it's lovely to catch up with you. So thank you so much. I'll put your details in the show notes, links to your books, and also the HR Net, if that's okay for people, if they want to take advantage of the stuff you're creating.
Sounds great. I appreciate it. It's so wonderful. And congratulations.
Thank you.
So excited for you.
Thank you. I'm so grateful.
I really hope you found this week's episode useful and enjoyable. If you did, perhaps you could recommend us to a friend or colleague, or give us a review on your platform of choice. It really helps new listeners to find us. Now you can access links to any of the information mentioned in this show via the website www.hruprising.com. Further free resources are also available at www.actus.co.uk. There you can also find out more about our software and training solutions. Finally, why not join our LinkedIn group, the HR Uprising, to share ideas and collaborate with other like-minded people professionals. Thank you for listening to the HR Uprising podcast.